समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
In what might be described as the most distant part of India, although it's located in the heart of India, in the east central zones of India, the wide east central zones of India. But I say the most distant, not physically, because in that case it will be Kashmir to Kanyakumari, not like that, but most distant in the sense that these are most out of sight, out of mind for the rest of the country. People say that Delhi doesn't bother about the northeast, for example, or doesn't bother about this or that. But the fact is that the regions we think about least of all are in the east central India. Most of these are tribal regions, or these were originally tribal regions where some urban areas have come up with outsiders. These are the regions where Naxalism, or you can call it Maoism, or it's also called in government circles, government documentation, it will be called LWE, Left Wing Extremism. That's been thriving there. Now what's happening there is, and it's quite remarkable, it's quite an incredible story, and the only reason we haven't been able to visit this so far, in fact there are two reasons. One reason is, as you know, the news cycle was taken over after Pahalgam for a month by what followed. But more importantly, there has also been a little bit of a diffidence on my part, because this is not a story I've covered in the past. Because if you've covered anything in the past, then you have some mental references and you can tie in some ends and threads here and there. I don't have it, so there was some diffidence. That's the reason I reached out finally to Ananya Bhardwaj, who's our editor covering internal security, and with her help, I have put together today's episode of Cut the Clutter. In fact, as you would expect, the print has been covering the story very closely. You can see stories by Ananya Bhardwaj and also Mayank Kumar. I'll be sharing some links with you. The reason we are doing it today is because one key figure in this Naxal/Maoist insurgency has died. That is Nambala Keshav Rao, also known as, in fact, popularly known as Basavaraju. All these Naxals, particularly prominent Naxals, have their nom de guerres. These are the new names they adopt. You can call them nicknames, but these are their names in their warring life. So this is Basavaraju, originally named Nambala Keshav Rao. He was the General Secretary of CPI Maoists. CPI Maoists is the apex organization of Indian armed Naxals, Indian armed left-wing extremists, Indian armed Marxist, Leninists, Maoists, whatever you call them. I say this again and again because there is also a party called CPI-ML, which is a legitimate political party, contests elections, has a couple of, sometimes more than a couple of MLAs in Bihar, also often has an MP or two in Lok Sabha as well. That is a legitimate party in the political mainstream. These are very confusing terminologies. That's why I'm over-stressing this distinction. Now, Nambala Keshav Rao, or Basavaraju, he became General Secretary of CPI Maoists, succeeding Mupala Lakshman Rao, alias Ganpati, nom de guerre Ganpati. Now, Ganpati is somebody we've heard about often. Sometimes you will see headlines saying he's cornered, then that he's escaped. The fact is that he's been very sick for a long time, and right now there are many rumors about him. Some rumors say he's passed away, some rumors say he's escaped to the Philippines. Whatever it is, he is not at all active. So he handed over to Basavaraju, who's now been killed in this latest encounter in which 27 Naxals, you can say alleged Naxals if you so please, they've been killed. This encounter took place in Abujhmad. Abujhmad is the most most difficult area so far for security forces to get to, because that was the GERD. It was the citadel of the Naxals. In fact, very often you found units of CRPF, state police that tried to go inside Abujhmad. They were ambushed and there were many casualties. What's happening lately is that in the entire region, including Karikuta Hills, which is on the border of Chhattisgarh and Telangana, for example, security forces are going to areas which earlier they were never going to. So Karikuta Hills is one of them. You might have seen stories that CRPF and the state police forces, particularly the DRG, which is the District Reserve Guard, they had laid siege there, but it looks like while they were able to establish control over the region, which was always under the sway of the Naxals, the key Naxal leaders there who are supposed to have been trapped, they escaped. Now, this latest operation in which 27 have been killed, that's been carried out by the DRG. These operations actually, if you look at the entire gamut, are being carried out jointly by the DRG and STF, that is Special Task Force, and also the CRPF. This particular one, however, Basavaraju, was more or less a DRG operation. Now, what is DRG? DRG was founded in 2008. You might remember that before that, in the tribal regions where Naxalism was rising, an experiment called Salva Judum was carried out. Salva Judum was a bit like protected villages where government police forces worked together with villagers. Those villagers volunteered for a small salary to fight the Naxal. So this was like putting tribal against tribal. It had some successes. It also had some terrible consequences. There were many excesses. So there were successes and excesses. Many of the activists that went to Supreme Court with a writ petition seeking Salva Judum to be declared unconstitutional, which was duly done in a Supreme Court order by Justice B. Sudarshan Reddy and Surinder Singh Nijjar, Justice Surinder Singh Nijjar, on July 5, 2011. In fact, in that order, they used very colorful language, drawing upon the imagery of a small book or a novella by Joseph Conrad. Joseph Conrad was a businessman who went to Congo in 1890s, and he wrote the story of exploitation, and he used the expression in that novella, the horror, the horror. So the judges quoted that exact expression, the horror, the horror. They also mentioned the three elements of darkness that novella described. And that novella, no surprise, was called Heart of Darkness. So first element in the darkness, which the judges quoted from the novella, was darkness of the forest, representing a struggle for life and the sublime. All right. Second, the darkness of colonial expansion for resources. So that indication or that pointer was towards the Indian state and also the Indian resource companies, Indian mining companies, steel companies, coal companies and others, because these are heavily mineral rich regions. And a lot of the Naxalite pressure or Maoist pressure was to prevent mining from taking place. And that's the reason a lot of the urban activists also got involved. They got very sympathetic because they thought they were only fighting, Naxals were only fighting against corporate exploitation, which was being carried out through a corporate state nexus, corporate government nexus. That is how the urban-rural hyphenation came into the equation. The third description for darkness that the judges drew from Conrad's book was the darkness represented by inhumanity and evil to which individual human beings are capable of descending when supreme and unaccounted force is vested in them. All of this reasoning, which the judges said represented, and I quote, the vilest scramble for loot that disfigured the history of human conscience. So they applied this principle to Salva Judum and they declared it unconstitutional. Now, whatever the reasoning, there are both sides to it, but the fact is with which the fight against Naxalism under the UPA came to an end. Before that, in 2010, there were massive attacks. There was a big attack, largest number of one days casualties for Indian security forces, uniformed forces for anywhere in India. Place called Tadmetla or Chintalnar. If you Google it, you can either find Tadmetla massacre or Chintalnar massacre. Tadmetla is the village. Chintalnar is a slightly more prominent village in the area, so it's easier to spot on Google Map. In that one, 76 CRPF men were massacred, almost to the last man, and all their weapons were looted, including light machine guns, mortars, rocket launchers, radio sets, all kinds of equipment, uniforms. Many of the bodies were also disfigured, and the loot was quite brutal. Those pictures went around the country. It resulted in a lot of anger. P. Chidambaram was then the Home Minister, and UPA government decided to launch a big operation to flush out these regions from Naxals. Now, I never saw that name mentioned formally anywhere. Somehow, Operation Green Hunt emerged from somewhere, but I have not seen it formally said anywhere. To me, it was still an urban legend, that name. But a big operation was planned after that to fight the Naxals. Dr. Manmohan Singh also described them as the most significant internal security threat for India. And yet, soon enough, that fight came to an end, because within the Congress party, opposition rose. Digvijay Singh wrote an article in the Economic Times saying how this was not the right approach. Right approach was to give tribals more of their benefits that had been promised, the laws which were to give them rights over their forests, etc. So Congress party went into the root causes rabbit hole. In the process, the war against Naxals came to a standstill. Whatever was left of it was then finished by this 2011 Supreme Court judgment disbanding Salva Judum. That is the past. Then you see things change. So I can start this with just 2025. We are not halfway through 2025. In fact, we are in the 5th month of 2025. And this is the year in which the anti-Naxal operations have really got new energy, unprecedented. Amit Shah, the Home Minister, Union Home Minister, had said that Naxalism, all of India will be declared Naxalism free by March of 2026. The way things are going, it might happen a little bit earlier than that. It can, and I will give you the reasons why. First of all, look at the data. Look at the number of Naxals killed. These are obviously government claims. Now, I'm sure some people will say that some of these might be innocent, but if so, that would apply sort of equally to every year. So the basic figure, the rounded figure still matters. 2020, number of Naxals killed 103, 2021, 126, 2022, 67, 2023, 58. It looks like as Naxalism is on the wane, maybe Naxals are going deeper into the forests and not coming to inhabited areas or to factory areas or to mining areas. That's where they used to, quote unquote, collect. In 2024, 237. So you can see that the operations have really picked up in 2025. And in 2025, even 5 months in the year have not passed. We are still 10 days before 5 months are finished. Already 201 Naxals have been killed. Over the last couple of months, there's been a flurry of encounters. Encounters with a large number of deaths. 33, 32, 27 in this case. And this is now happening in all of the left-wing extremism affected area. Before 2014, as the UPA demitted office, there were 126 districts which were declared left-wing extremism affected or Maoist or Naxal affected, right? That's when the BJP in its campaign said that there is a red corridor, Tirupati se Pashupati tak. That means Tirupati was deliberately chosen because that's where on the way to the temple, Chandrababu Naidu and his motorcade were ambushed. He suffered injuries. It was a very serious attack, after which he had launched within Andhra a massive campaign against the Naxals. That was one. That's why Tirupati and Pashupati, because even in Nepal, there were strong elements of Maoists. In fact, some of them gave up arms and came to power as well. In fact, most of the ruling class in Nepal today could be described as former armed Maoists. Now they've come in the mainstream. That's why the slogan that India has a red corridor from Tirupati to Pashupati, and that is unacceptable. That was the BJP's promise. By 2018, Home Ministry data showed us that these districts had reduced to 90. Again, the official data tells us that by April 2024, the number of these districts had reduced to 38. However, Amit Shah says now that at this point, only 6 districts in India can be described as left-wing extremism affected or Maoism affected. Of these, 4 are in Chhattisgarh, Bijapur, Kanked, Narayanpur and Sukma, 1 in Jharkhand, that is West Singhbhum, and 1 in Maharashtra, that is Gadchiroli. So I can tell you, looking at all this data, that Naxalism, armed Naxalism is now shrinking quite heavily, because it's not just that Basavaraju who has been killed just now. So a number of senior leaders have been killed in the last 4 years, but some very recently as well. For example, in April in Jharkhand, Prayag Maji was killed. He was the one who commanded the Parasnath Hills stronghold of the Naxals in Jharkhand. He was successor to Prashant Bose, who was arrested in November 21. Then Ramchandra Reddy, who's also called in some records Gari Pratap Reddy, but generally known by his nom de guerre, Chalapati, he was killed in January 2025. So you can see a pattern of senior key figures. Many of them are carrying a price of more than 1 crore on their heads. In fact, Basavaraju had 1.5 crore. So you can see that the Naxal leadership is now folding up. And I will give you some names and ages, so you will know that the leadership, what remains of the leadership is now old. Of the Central Committee, which at one point was 30 strong, at this point not more than 15 are active. Of the Politburo, which was 7 to 12, at this point we can only identify 3 names, of whom one is Ganapati, wherever he is, who's supposed to be extremely sick. So the leadership is folding up and new leaders are not coming in. New recruits are not coming in. Now these are key people. Basavaraju, for example, it wasn't just the Chintalnar/Tadmetla massacre where 76 CRP people were killed. There were also many other massacres, including the Jhiram Ghati massacre, or what's called the Jhiram Ghati massacre, where veteran Congress leader Vidyacharan Shukla, BC Shukla, and 28 others were killed. That was in 2013. And there were many other attacks on the police forces, etc., etc., etc. Now, one reason this success is coming is that the police forces which are fighting or which are acting against Naxals are locally drawn. That is what I had started out with earlier, where I told you that these are operations being carried out by the DRG or the District Reserve Guard. Now, what is District Reserve Guard? I told you that Salva Judum was disbanded. Now, many of the people in Salva Judum who had learned to use arms and who were now worried, because people who were in Salva Judum were now, particularly those who had some leadership position, they were now being specifically and personally targeted by the Naxals and assassinated. For example, Mahendra Karma, who was seen to be a Salva Judum strongman, very tough man, had been very tough on the Naxals. He was assassinated in a brutal manner in May 2013 because the Supreme Court had disbanded Salva Judum, government had dumped Salva Judum, but the Naxals had not forgiven Salva Judum. So many of them now joined this DRG. So it was them. There were many other tribals, mostly tribals, who are direct recruits because they wanted jobs. And then there is a third category of people in the DRG. These are former Maoists who had surrendered. They are in a smaller number, but they are also essential to DRG and they are also so important to the success of DRG. In fact, the latest few operations, the CRPF actually has very little involvement, if at all any. This is being done by the DRG, and the experience in India tells us that movements like this ultimately are controlled, or insurgencies like this are ultimately controlled when that state's police gets involved. That is also the experience of Punjab, because Punjab insurgency was fought and finished between 1991 and 1994 by Punjab Police under KPS Gill. So this is really a turnaround for the situation. Now with so much of the leadership wiped out, I told you Central Committee that used to be 30 strong now has 15 active members, Politburo 7 to 12, we can identify 3 living right now because it was 4, but with the departure of Basavaraju, it leaves 3. So one is Mr. Besra, who's 63. He's from Girdi, has a price of 1 crore on him. He's the commander of Eastern Regional Bureau, which means Jharkhand, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, etc. Then there is Madhvi Hidma. Madhvi Hidma, a tribal, Santhal tribal, is the youngest of the current leadership. He's 51. He's also like the commander-in-chief of the fighting forces of the Naxalites. Basavaraju, who died, is the general secretary, the overall boss. So these are the 3 that survive. Among the 3 I told you, there is also Ganpati, who's not very well if he's around. Then Central Committee members, some of the prominent ones. I will tell you the names. The names may not matter to you right now, but I will mention ages. That will tell you a story. Vivek Chandra Yadav, 60. Kadir Satyanarayan Reddy, 63. Thipiri Tirupati alias Devuji, 62. Pullari Prasad Rao alias Chandrana, 68. Modem Balakrishna, 57. Arun Bhattacharji alias Kanchan, 61. Malla Raji Reddy alias Santhana, 73. Ganesh VK, 60. Patiram Maji alias Analda, 57. Pramod Mishra, 69. Pramod Mishra, 69. So you can see all of these are really old people, and it tells us that Naxals have not been able to get younger people in leadership positions. That means recruitment has gone down. Now there's a few things you will notice there. One, you will see that a large number of these leaders, the key figures, are actually from what used to be Andhra Telangana. They are not from tribal areas. How did they get to tribal areas? The founder of the movement, the Naxal movement, started in Naxalbari in West Bengal in the late 60s by Charu Majumdar. There was Charu Majumdar, there was Kanu Sanyal. Those are storied names. It also found a lot of support in the colleges, educational institutions in Calcutta, in urban areas, and lots of people were killed. There was bloodshed. Indian state fought back, involved the army as well, and the Eastern Army commander at that point was none else than Lieutenant General SHFJ Manik Shaw, because war with Bangladesh was coming up and Mrs. Gandhi did not want any trouble in the rear of her armed forces. So this was crushed in the course of time in that period. When Kondapalli Sitaramaiah, he's the man who founded this new Naxal movement in what was then Andhra Pradesh, but drier parts of Andhra Pradesh, because Telangana region had a history of radical left-wing movements going right back to the period of independence. So there he found grassroots support and he founded this new group. So one of the new groups was CPI-ML PW. CPI-ML, you can understand, Marxist-Leninist. But PW is People's War. This came to be called People's War Group in the course of time. Then a second group came, Maoist Communist Center of India. At some point, MCCI and People's War Group, they combined and they became CPI Maoist. Now, learning from Charu Majumdar's mistakes, why did Naxalism fail in West Bengal? So Kondapalli Sitaramaiah thought that there were 2 reasons. So one reason was that those Naxals, Charu Majumdar, Kanu Sanyal, that era, those Naxals were not able to build an overground organization. An overground organization means a kind of activist organization which does not take up arms, so they are not targeted by the security forces because they are not fighting, they are not resorting to violence, but they are taking your ideology forward. That is a mistake they made. The second mistake was they did not create a rear base. How did Kondapalli Sitaramaiah address this? So he founded Radical Students Union. Radical Students Union, by the way, is now a banned organization. On campuses, would say things that Naxals say, but they will not pick up arms. So nobody could say that they are violent. That's how they keep on working under the radar. They became the urban support base. particularly in educational institutions where you could find young recruits as well. And the second mistake he thought Charu Majumdar made was not building a rear base. A rear base means if you are operating in your own villages and you have no place to hide, ultimately you will be caught, because those Naxals were fighting local landlords, etc. Everybody knows everybody in a village. That's the reason he took his movement deep inside the forests of Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and Odisha and Maharashtra as well, because at that point, those areas were very poorly administered, if administered at all. It was as if these were all stateless territories. That is the reason this insurgency thrived for such a long time. Many of the people you see now, many of the leaders, have learned from that period from Kondapalli Sitaramaya. Those are the leaders which are now being consumed in these anti-Naxal operations. And as you would expect, once again, Naxals have said that they want a ceasefire, they are willing to negotiate, but unlikely that this government will do any such thing. When UPA was in power, very often when such situations arose, pressure came in from powerful quarters that negotiation should be started. A storied event is when Akiraju Hargopal, who was one of the ranking top leaders of the Naxals, and Comrade Riaz, two of them were encircled by Andhra Pradesh police and they were going to be annihilated. That word came from Delhi that, look, there's no point killing them, let them go. They've promised they will come back for talks. So they came back for talks. That is something that all of the media covered. In fact, Akiraju Hargopal came to those talks in battle fatigues, carrying an AK-47, but those talks led to nothing. And what should have probably begun to fold back in 2004, 5, 6, at least in 2010-11, after the gravest provocation of that Tadmetla/Chintalnar massacre of 76 CRP people, is happening now, because at this point, whatever your view, whatever ideology you belong to, the fact is that politically at the central government and the state government level, there is no muddled thinking. It is a single-minded assault on the Maoists, and the effects are showing on the ground. Of course, we could always say, and we should say in conclusion, that this should not mean that exploitation, because tribals do have many complaints of exploitation, that exploitation should continue, or that now that it will become more possible for the resources of that region, mineral resources I'm talking about, for these to be mined and exploited, the local populations should get their fair share.